Hello. For this meditation, I would like to draw from some wisdom by Pema Chodron. She's an American Buddhist nun who is very well known. She's written many books, her teachings you've likely heard. Maybe a quote here, maybe a quote there without necessarily knowing it was her. But I'd like to share a little bit with you from this book and then sit in meditation with a practice based around it. So I thought it was a great book to draw from, Living Beautifully with Uncertainty and Change. Because my goodness, that is the topic, isn't it? It is what is up. It's not just what's up for us, it's what's up for the whole world. So I want to share a little bit about what she's talking about here in terms of one way to approach uncertainty and impermanence. And actually, this is a precept of Buddhism. And just to be clear, in case you're not aware, Buddhism isn't a religion, it's a philosophy. You can be Christian and be Buddhist, you could be Jewish and be Buddhist, you could be atheist and be Buddhist. It's not tied to a religion. It's more of a way of walking through life, a way of showing up and encountering and relating to life, to our loved ones, to ourselves, and to nature, and to a higher being as well. So in this particular section that I'm going to read from, she's talking about impermanence and how impermanence really is all that there is for most of what we have come to think is real and true. And how a lot of suffering, most suffering comes from attachment. Where's the root of this? According to this reading here, this thought that there should be this permanent state of pleasure and happiness and surety. And when that goes away, we can get thrown off kilter. And even for those of us who have really practiced how to be able to flow with life and how to be able to move and shift, sometimes things come up, Exhibit A, our life now, that really test that. And, I have been in isolation, in quarantine, actually, for 29 days, and in isolation now for going on 37, 38 days, something like that. And I've practiced, throughout my life. This work is not new to me, but these times are challenging. And what I'm seeing is I have been given a gift, whether I asked for it or not, to really step up to those practices. And I like that way of viewing it. It's not because things aren't going to be hard, because my goodness, things have been difficult, as I'm sure is true for you. And yet I'm being offered this opportunity to meet the difficulty with my practices, to really put them to the test, and they are being tested. And what I know is that every time that I am met with that challenge with my practice and it shifts my reaction to the situation, every time that happens, I become more solid, more grounded, more rooted into my strength. So, a bit of a reading here. This is a chapter called The Fundamental Ambiguity of Being Human. Now, keep in mind, this was written far before the pandemic, and yet it's so relevant. As human beings, we share a tendency to scramble for certainty whenever we realize that everything around us is in flux. In difficult times, the stress of trying to find solid ground, something predictable and safe to stand on, seems to intensify. But in truth, the very nature of our existence is forever in flux. Everything keeps changing, whether we're aware of it or not. What a predicament. We seem doomed to suffer simply because we have a deep-seated fear of how things really are. Our attempts to find lasting pleasure, lasting security, are at odds with the fact that we're a part of a dynamic system in which everything and everyone is in process. So this is where we find ourselves, right in the middle of a dilemma. And it leaves us with some provocative questions. How can we live wholeheartedly in the face of impermanence, knowing that one day we're going to die? What is it like to realize we can never completely and finally get it all together? Is it possible to increase our tolerance for instability and change? How can we make friends with unpredictability and uncertainty and embrace them as vehicles to transform our lives? And she goes on. And she talks about the fundamental anxiety of being human, as her first teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, who is another wonderful Buddhist teacher that you can look up or not, would talk about this fundamental anxiety of being human. And this is her take on his talking about that. This anxiety or queasiness in the face of impermanence isn't something that afflicts just a few of us. It's an all-pervasive state that human beings share. But rather than being disheartened by the ambiguity, the uncertainty of life, what if we accepted it and relaxed into it? What if we said, yes, this is the way it is right now. This is what it means to be human. Whether we're conscious of it or not, the ground is always shifting. Nothing lasts, including us. There are probably very few people who at any given time are consumed with the idea, I'm going to die. But there is plenty of evidence that this thought, this fear, haunts us constantly. So, what does it feel like to be human in this ambiguous, groundless state? For one thing, we grab at pleasure and try to avoid pain. But despite our efforts, we're always alternating between the two. Under the illusion that experiencing constant security and well-being is the ideal state, we do all sorts of things to achieve it. Eat, drink, drug, work too hard, spend hours online or watching TV. But somehow we never quite achieve the state of unwavering satisfaction that we're seeking. At times, we feel good. Physically, nothing hurts, and mentally, all's well. Then it changes. And we're hit with physical pain or mental anguish. I imagine it would even be possible to chart how pleasure and pain alternate in our lives, hour by hour, day after day, year in, year out. First one, and then the other predominating. But it's not impermanence, per se, or even knowing we're going to die, that is the cause of our suffering. Rather, it's our resistance to the fundamental uncertainty of our situation. Our discomfort arises from all our efforts to put ground under our feet, to realize our dream of constant okayness. When we resist change, it's called suffering. But when we completely let go and not struggle against it, when we can embrace the groundlessness of our situation and relax into its dynamic quality, that's called enlightenment or awakening to our true nature, to our fundamental goodness. Another word for this is freedom. Freedom from struggling against the fundamental ambiguity of being human. What I would like to offer in this meditation is that as we sit, I want us to have an opportunity to get to look at the thought, to simply notice the thought. And it's talked about how simply the ability to observe that there is a thought automatically disidentifies you with it. And why do I want to disidentify with it? Because it takes the power that our power that we've given to that thought, it takes it away off of that thought, which is illusion, and it puts it back into our own being, our own state. Now, why do I know that that thought is an illusion? Because it's going to change. What's real does not change. And if you ponder that for a while, you'll come to find that very little of what we think is true about the world is actually real. Most of it is an illusion. For instance, you could be watching this with a friend, or maybe several friends. Probably not right now, but someday. Each one of you is going to have come to watching this video from a different day, from a different last hour. And so you'll be hearing something different. You'll be getting something different out of it. Some of you will think it's rubbish. Some of you will think it's fantastic and exactly what you needed. And who's right? And who's wrong? There's no such. So, how can we begin to disidentify with our thoughts, our emotions, as being real? When we do that, then we can start to notice, okay, what is it that I am being drawn towards, I'm attracted to? What is it that I'm really having an aversion to? Or what is it that I just have an indifference about? It's this process that helps us to understand ourselves a bit more. And when we can understand ourselves and sit with it and not need to change it and not identify it, but simply be with it, that's the place that compassion and love come from. And something eventually shifts in us when we do this with regular practice. Something begins to alter. We aren't so reactive all the time. It does not mean everything's going to be perfect in your life. It does not mean you will never get sick. It does not mean that you will always be happy, that you will never experience loss or divorce. It is not bunny rabbits and rainbows. And anyone that is trying to sell you that is trying to sell you something. But what it is freedom. Freedom to simply be and breathe and flow. And just like water flowing through a river, just like water passing by, things always shift. They always change. From moment to moment, it is never the same. One moment is turbulent. One moment is placid, lovely, soothing. Both of them, all of them, are part of life. What we come to do with that understanding, once we can see for ourselves, not just believe what somebody says, but see for ourselves the truth that we are not that thought, that emotion. Once we can disidentify and yet still participate in life, it's up to us what we do with the wisdom that follows. Okay, let's sit, shall we? So get comfortable in a comfortable seat, and let's do sit up for this one. Unless, of course, you really want to lie down. I'm not going to No. Honestly, I'm not going to know. I want you to be really comfortable. Wherever you are, let yourself settle into the support underneath you. Feel your arms resting, the shoulders dropping away from the ears, the jaw releasing away from the skull, your spine lengthening, supple, fluid. Feel your breath deepening, the tops of your thighs lengthening and widening. And give yourself an object of meditation. This object of meditation is what you're going to come back to when the thought comes in, which inevitably it will. You'll simply bring your awareness back to the object of meditation. So let's start with that object of meditation being the sounds in the room. Can you hear a faint buzz from the lights? A click of the fan. And if your eyes aren't closed already, I invite you to close them. It's fine for this meditation if you'd like to leave them open. If you do, have a central focal point in front of you on the ground or on the wall in front of you if you're lying down, so that the lids are mostly closed. And if your eyes are closed, I'd like to invite you to let the eyes rotate inside the sockets so that they're up towards the brow. Now, turn your awareness to the breath. So this fixed point of gaze allows you to look within. And when I say look within, I really mean feel the breath. Feel the sensation of the breath at the nostrils. Really focus your awareness there, where you feel the coolness of the air passing through the nostrils on the in-breath and the warmth on the out-breath. Give your mind that task. and keep assigning it. If the thoughts, the distractive thoughts come in, notice them, but don't follow them. Bring the awareness back to the sensation of the breath at the nostrils. You might imagine those thoughts like soap bubbles. And as you redirect your thoughts, your mind, your attention back to the sensation of the breath, the soap bubble pops. And so now that space that was contained by the gloss of the soap bubble has become expansive again, free. You might notice all kinds of games and tricks that your mind plays to catch your attention. Bring it back. You're training your mind. And now that awareness of the sensation of the breath, let's place it in the center of the chest, as though you had nostrils there in the center of your chest. Place it mid-chest, mid or lower, but not in the belly and not in the throat. And feel that breath there. And now sit for 2 minutes with the breath, noticing the thought and then turning your attention back to the breath. So you see the thought, but you don't look at it too long. then let your eyes come open. So, what did you notice? I encourage you to grab a journal and jot down what you noticed. And rather than being focused on tracking the thoughts you had, because that would give power and weight to those thoughts, can you instead focus on maybe the quality of the energy that came up as a result of either being able to let go of tracking that thought or the inability to do so? Did it feel like freedom to let it go? Like peace? Like willingness? Or did it feel like a clinging, like a nervousness? What if I lose it? Will I get it back? You know, some of my best ideas come whenever I'm meditating, and I don't always remember them because I have to be willing to let them go. This is an ultimate act of faith. I have to be willing to believe, to know that my own brilliance will bring it back to me if I need it. So often we think that the mind is the thing we should listen to. The mind is not the intuition. It's not our creativity. And yet we want to be able to use it. We want to be able to wield its power to help us get tasks done. But if we make it the master, then we are not using it. It is using us. And that's when things get out of control. They might work for a while until they don't. And when they don't, how can we meet that moment? If we aren't identified with the mind, it becomes much easier. All right. So that's the teaching for today. I hope it's useful for you, and let me know how it goes.